This Saturday night in prime time, we have a matchup between two national championship contenders here. As at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 6:30 p.m. local time in the Central Time Zone, streaming on ABC and ESPN Plus in DKR Texas Memorial Stadium. Man, that's a mouthful. We have the 5th-ranked Georgia Bulldogs at 5-1, 3-1 in SEC conference play, taking on the number 1 undefeated 6-0, 2-0 in SEC play, Texas Longhorns. This is a game that I am very excited to watch. As all of my subscribers know, College Football with Sam is a Big Ten focused channel. This is the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube, but this is again, college football playoff play-in game, sort of, and the loser here still has a shot to make it, especially if their name is Texas. Winner here probably is, to a certain degree, a playoff lock, if we're being honest. And I'm very excited to cover it. It's a big-time matchup here, and we want to be the best college football channel on YouTube one day. And it's going to be because of the fans we have now, because of the Big Ten fans that make up most of our subscriber base. But to Georgia fans and Texas fans watching, hopefully it is because of you that one day we become the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube. Texas opened up as a 3.5-point favorite, and they've already moved up to a 5-point favorite. This is the first time that Georgia has been an underdog in a college football game since 2020 against Alabama. And Georgia has been the best program in college football of the 2020s. They had a 42-2 overall record spanning from 2021 to 2023 when they went undefeated in all of those regular seasons, 12-0, 8-0 in SEC play, 42-2. You add in Georgia's 9-2 season of 2020, and then you add in the record so far that is 5-1 right there this season. So lost to Alabama on the road. Really, the shame in that loss is the performance that Georgia had in the first half, where they started off extremely slow. There's no shame in losing just by a random touchdown to Alabama on the road. It was more so because of the individual performance. And it was an 8-2 record in the 2020 season, that really weird COVID year. But that's 13-3 in the bookend years between those amazing 3 years from 21 to 23. And right there, that 13-3 record, adding that in, Georgia has been 55-5. You heard that right. 55-5 in the 2020s. That is extreme dominance. And they've only had 3 SEC losses, 3 conference losses in the best conference in America in that time frame. This still, I believe, is the number 1 program in college football. And I still believe that Kirby Smart is college football's best head coach, though it's not as clear as when Nick Saban was head coach, and he was obviously number 1 in that regard. Texas has a chance to change that narrative, though, that Georgia is the best program in college football. If they get a big win here, with how dominant they've played and with how they're recruiting and the fact that Texas's teams under Sarkisian have gotten better and better every year, I wouldn't say they'd immediately overthrow Georgia as the number 1 program in the SEC and the nation, but they'd be getting pretty damn close to doing that, in my mind. Texas needs this game. Georgia needs it so that they can host a college football playoff game, so they can still reach the SEC championship game, and to really put some confidence on Georgia's team and show that, well, they can play at an elite level, because they're going to have to if they want to beat Texas. And as for Texas, this is a big game because I know they went on the road and beat Alabama last year, but Alabama early last year was not good, and it was one big win for Steve Sarkisian. One big win. A big win, a single one, can be a fluke. A second one is harder to call a fluke. A third, fourth, you start to see a pattern. I hope you get what I'm saying here. If Texas wins this game, the confidence in this team begins to, I think, exponentially grow, because they haven't faced all that many teams this season who can test them. Georgia is going to be by far their biggest test, but seeing that they've blown out everyone they've played, Texas can win this game. After all, they're favored by 5 points. And before we dive deep into this preview and prediction, I've already laid the groundwork for how intense this matchup is going to be. Please subscribe to the channel. Please hit the share button the notification bell, like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe again, and hit that notification bell so that you can get notified when we release more college football content. Both of these teams could rematch in the SEC championship game, and we're going to be covering that here on College Football with Sam because, again, we cover big games regardless of whether or not they're in the Big Ten. We try and cover the biggest games, and the SEC championship will be one of those. So you won't want to miss that. And also, comment your prediction for this game down below. And I mentioned earlier how Texas and Georgia fans watching this video can help this channel become the best college football channel on YouTube. Well, you can help us produce the best environment and culture among college football YouTube channels by joining our Discord server via the link in the description and down below in the pinned comment. There are threads for all 18 Big Ten teams in the Discord server, but there's a thread for the SEC as well, and we would love for there to be activity from all across the country, from all college football teams in our Discord server. It would make our lives, I would say, that much better when it comes to college football. And it is a good environment. It is a happy environment, a joyful environment. There are good things that happen in that Discord server, and you get to interact with me occasionally and all of our other followers in the server. So please join that if you would. And if you want to support the channel monetarily, check out the Patreon page and sign up as an all-conference, all-American, or Heisman member. And you can also purchase merchandise from our merch store. Both of those are in the link in the description and down below in the pinned comment. Same with the Discord server. But ultimately, liking, sharing, subscribing, hitting the bell, commenting, the things you can do for free, along with the Discord server, those are the most helpful. Let's look at these teams from a bird's eye view. We like to, fly our drone over the trees and then softly land in the forest, so we can check out the finer details. We'll get into the finer details in a few minutes. But it's obvious that these are some of the best teams in college football. Texas is number 1 in FPI. They're number 1 in S&P+. From the data that I have and from what I have watched on film, I believe that Texas is the best team in the country. They're viewed as 29.7 points superior to the average college football team, according to FPI. And they're viewed as 30 points flat, better than the average college football team in S&P+. Georgia is top 5 in both FPI and S&P+, viewed as 25.5 points better than the average college football team in S&P+, and 22.5 points better than the average college football team in FPI. You add in home field advantage here, which Vegas typically describes as 3 points. I think that for an environment, whether it's Sanford Stadium for Georgia or DKR, Texas Memorial Stadium for Texas, I think in those bigger, more rowdy college football environments, you probably have more than 3 points advantage for the home team. I would say give Texas anywhere from, 5 to 7 points of home field advantage because they have 100,000 seating. It's going to be a night game, and the fan base is going to be rowdy because this is the biggest game that's taken place inside of this stadium since 2022 against whether it's TCU or Alabama. Name whatever game you thought was more important for Texas that season. You add that up, that home field advantage in, and per FPI, Texas should be favored by anywhere from really 11 or 12 points all the way up to 2 touchdowns. Or in S&P Plus, it's anywhere from about 8-9 points to around 10 or 11. And yet the spread is only 5. And even if you take out home field advantage, or if you leave it at just 3, if you think what I'm telling you is too big of a number, Texas should still be favored by around 10 in FPI, or at least a touchdown neutral field, and around 8 in S&P Plus, around 8, or just 5 neutral field. So I do think that is... I do think that it's a little bit interesting, the fact that this spread is small. I think part of it is the fact that Georgia has been tested facing Alabama on the road, and Kirby Smart is, I would say, the better head coach than Steve Sarkisian, certainly has a better reputation in terms of wins because he's been at Georgia longer, and Sark is only in his 4th season. And that's really it, I think, for the spread. Although there's maybe some type of information that we don't know, I really think that's the simple explanation. Also because, well, if Texas was favored by double digits, I'm pretty sure everyone would be betting on Georgia, or most of everyone. And Vegas, of course, needs to balance the books, hedge the bets. It's wise because Kirby Smart and Georgia have been successful in big games as of recent memory. You look at the points per play margin for both of these teams. Georgia has a points per play margin of 0.138, which means that for every play that Georgia runs compared to every play that their average opponent runs, Georgia scores about 0.138 more points per play. Texas, meanwhile, this is insane. They have a points per play margin of 0.521. For every one play that Texas runs compared to every one play that their average opponent runs, Texas scores a little more than over half of a point compared to their opponent per play. That's insane. This is the most dominant team in college football. You're looking at them in Texas, commanded by an offensive genius in Steve Sarkisian and a roster that is among one of the best in college football right now. And you also look at the strength of schedules for these teams, and you see there's some disparity there. Points per play margin basically measures dominance without factoring in strength of schedule. Game control measures dominance while trying to factor in strength of schedule. Texas is first in game control, which basically translates as they're the best equipped team in college football to win games, and Georgia is 13th in game control. But they've played a top 10 strength of schedule. Texas has played the 82nd toughest strength of schedule. So a few key differences there for these teams in terms of the opponents that they have played. Georgia, for example, they have played Alabama, and Alabama is much better than the toughest team that Texas has played, whether that's Michigan on the road or Oklahoma in a neutral field. Kentucky is a similar style of team to Michigan and Oklahoma. They just are. And Georgia played them and beat them. Now by only a point, obviously, while Texas beat Oklahoma by 31, and they beat Michigan really by 25 before Michigan scored that garbage time touchdown to make it a 19-point game. But regardless, Georgia is more battle-tested than Texas. That's a fact, and Texas looks to be the more dominant team at the same time. I think that the critical matchup here is Georgia's rushing attack and their offensive line against a Texas defense that has not been tested a whole lot. Some say that the key to this game is Carson Beck and his receivers doing good work through the air and being efficient. And I think that's a part of it. But I also believe that if Texas is just shutting down Georgia's rushing offense and Georgia has to go in an air raid and Beck has to throw 50 or 55 times to win this game, I don't think Georgia will win the game that way. Because I do think that this Georgia offense, while good, is not equipped to win in a shootout against this Texas offense, especially when you look at these defenses. And I don't think that Georgia has the defense they had in 21 or 22. I think right now you're seeing how big of a role Dan Lanning played in Georgia's defense. Every year after he has left, the defense has regressed slightly. Became worse from 21 to 22, worse from 22 to 23. This defense looks worse than last year's defense. Early in the season, especially with what they did to Clemson in hindsight, I don't know if that looked to be the case, but Alabama just annihilated that defense. Straight up annihilated them. Scored 39 offensive points on that Georgia defense. And I think that it's been verified now that Alabama's offense, while it can play at a very high level, is not the best offense in the country. And Georgia had a pretty weird game against Mississippi State where their defense also didn't look good. I don't think a shootout where you have to throw it a bunch of times through the air benefits Georgia. I think that benefits Texas with Quinn Ewers and their superior receiver core and also their superior pass protection unit. What will benefit Georgia here is running the ball with Trevor Etienne and their offensive line, which Texas is equipped to do with their offensive line, but they don't have the same caliber of running back that Georgia does. They don't. And I think that with the loss of Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, there's a chance for Georgia to run on Texas here. I don't think they're going to run for a bunch of yards and own Texas on the ground like I honestly thought they were going to do in the preseason. And you look at rushing defense here. Georgia is only allowing 6.2 rushing first downs per game, 3.9 opponent yards per carry, and about 121 yards per game. Texas is allowing 103 on the ground, 5.7 rushing first downs per game, and they're only allowing opponents to average 3 yards per carry on them. But Michigan was able to run on them a little bit, and outside of Michigan, they haven't played really anyone that has even a competent rushing offense. Georgia, offensively on the ground, has struggled this year, but as my friend Joe DeLeon said on the Ruffino and Joe show, there's a chance that's because, like against Alabama, for example, they had to practically abandon the run so they could catch up and get explosive plays to win. Georgia on the ground this season is only averaging 4.3 yards per carry, 127.6 rushing yards per game. They're outside the top 50 in both of those categories, but they're only trying to run the ball for about 29.8 attempts per game, which is outside of the top 100. So I think, given the efficiency that they are showcasing with the small amount of runs they have, if they run the football more, I think they may have some success there, because again, they're outside the top 100 in that category, and Texas really has yet to be tested on the ground. Michigan's rushing offense is good, great, maybe near elite or elite when it's high functioning, but because they're one-dimensional, they can't always be high functioning, and Texas got ahead of Michigan so quickly that they had to abandon the run and didn't have much of a chance to run on the Longhorns in that game. So this Texas defensive line and defense overall has not been tested all that much. I think it's good. I think it's great, this defense is. It could be an elite defense. It could be. But we don't know yet. We know more about Georgia than we know about Texas, which makes this game all that much more exciting, because there's a chance that in the same way that Georgia can win, probably by running the football, there's also a chance that Texas's defense shows up, controls Georgia's offense, and that maybe they win big here in their stadium, in their own home field. It'd be the biggest win at home for Texas in quite some time, in several years, easily. In fact, I can't even remember the last time that Texas won a big game in their own home stadium. I can't. Maybe I'm forgetting some game from last year, but their biggest game last year in the regular season was Alabama on the road and Oklahoma in a neutral field. Those are their biggest games. And in 2022, home against TCU, lost to them. They beat Kansas State on the road, and then they lost to Alabama at home. In 2021, they were 5-7. So it would be a massive win for the fan base and for the team for Texas if they do achieve it. Looking at these offenses here, I think Georgia's better at running back and on the interior of the offensive line, even with some of their injuries. But there's only a slight edge, I think, for Georgia on the interior of that line. On the exterior, at tackle, Texas has a big-time advantage with Kelvin Banks, who I think is the best offensive tackle nationally, and Texas is superior at quarterback, obviously wide receiver, and I also think tight end. I think Georgia's been a little bit disappointing at tight end this season. You look at the passing offense for both of these teams, and Texas this year is averaging almost 500 yards per game total, 6th with 495.5 total yards per game. They're averaging 7.1 yards per play, which is 10th. In passing, Texas is 59th in pass attempts per game, only averaging 32, and yet they pass for 306.5 yards per game, which is 11th. They average 9.6 yards per pass attempt, which is 8th, and 13.5 yards per completion, which is 26th. On average, they complete 70.83% of their passes. Their average team pass rating's a 177 flat. Pretty crazy. And their offensive line only allows a 3.03% sack rate, which is 24th. I'm just saying, this Texas offense is a absolute beast. And that was just the passing offense. You look at the rushing offense, Texas is averaging 5.1 yards per carry, which is 25th, 189 yards per game on the ground, which is 38th, and they're 53rd in rushing attempts per game, averaging 36.8. And that is with not Jonathan Brooks, but I forget who their leading rusher is, who got injured in the preseason. I'm gonna have to look here, and the name will come to me eventually. But right now, Quintravian Wisner is the leader in rushing yards with 278 for 2 touchdowns, averaging 6.2 yards per carry. Texas has ran the ball for over 1,000 yards in 6 games, even with the injuries. Yep, C.J. Baxter. I thought so. C.J. Baxter's tragically hurt. I hope that he has a big bounce back year next season, and I'm praying for him. We should all be praying for him. Tragic what happened to him in the preseason. And yet Texas has overcome that adversity, and with Quintravian Wisner, Jaden Blue, Jarrett Gibson, Colin Page, they're fighting through and they're finding ways to run the football. And I think against Oklahoma, they just ate on the ground, where Wisner had over 100 rushing yards. Texas on the day had 177 rushing yards for 5.9 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns. Texas just annihilated. They completely annihilated Oklahoma. That game was never in doubt. It reminded me a lot of Georgia versus Florida in 2021, where it was a close game for 1.5 quarters or 1 3/4 quarters, and then Texas got a bunch of touchdowns before the half in the same way that Georgia did against Florida that season, and then it was game over at the halftime. And then they scored a few more times in the second half and just slowly wound the game down. That's how dominant Texas is on the offensive side of the ball, that they could just, honestly, in a boring way, kill Oklahoma's defense. You look at the quarterbacks for both of these teams, Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers. Carson Beck this year has had some of his struggles, so has Quinn Ewers, but Carson Beck has passed for 1,818 yards, 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He's completed 67.9% of his throws for 8.7 yards per pass attempt, and he's 19th in QBR, despite a game against Alabama where he started out playing horrific, and he also had a pretty bad game against Kentucky. You look at Texas, their leader in passing is actually still Arch Manning with 901 passing yards. Part of me wouldn't be shocked if he was put in this game, not as the starter. That would be a ridiculously unintelligent hot take, but rather as maybe a quarterback who can run the football and throw a wrinkle at Georgia's defense. I don't know if that'll even happen. It wouldn't shock me because Manning does have some incredible mobility. Ewers, though, will be the starter. He has completed 72.2% of his passes, averaging 8.2 yards per pass attempt for 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 890 yards. He had a rusty game against Oklahoma, which is expected due to the fact that he took a few games off to rest his injury. I think that he'll play a better game against Georgia than he did against Oklahoma. And then as for their wide receivers, Texas is led by Isaiah Bond with 369 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. Gunnar Helm, Ryan Wingo, Matthew Golden, DeAndre Moore Jr., Jonte Cook, Jaden Blue, and Silas Bolden, they all have at least 1 receiving touchdown. Many of them have 2 or 3 receiving touchdowns. And all of those receivers I named, except for Silas Bolden, have over 100 receiving yards. So when you average 13.5 receiving yards per reception, and you have 1,840 total passing yards, and you can be explosive, you can be effective in the short or intermediate passing game, you have awesome receivers, you have awesome tight ends. Gunnar Helm is one of the better tight ends in the nation right now. And you compare that to Georgia's wide receiver room, their leader is Arian Smith, who has 412 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell, Colby Young, Lawson Lucky, and London Humphreys are other players that have at least 1 receiving touchdown. They're averaging 12.6 yards per reception, and they have 1,908 passing yards on the season. Again, I think Georgia's better at running back, center, and guard. Very close at center and guard, and I'd also say very close at running back. I think that Georgia's the better starter. Texas is the better depth there. Texas is slightly better at quarterback. I'd say significantly better at wide receiver and tight end, and also significantly better at offensive tackle. Defensively, this is an interesting case study because Texas right now is number 1 in over 10 defensive categories. Let me list you all the categories they are number 1 in per teamrankings.com. Opponent points allowed per game, opponent yards per point, opponent points per play, Opponent red zone scoring attempts per game, opponent red zone scores per game, opponent red zone scoring percentage, opponent offensive touchdowns per game, opponent offensive points per game estimated, third quarter points per game, opponent overtime points per game, opponent second half points per game, opponent total yards per game, only allowing 229.7, opponent yards per play, teams only allow 3.5 yards per play on Texas's defense, compared to 5.5 yards per play on Georgia's defense. They're third in opponent first downs per game, only allowing 13.7. And Texas is first in opponent punts per offensive score. Teams punt almost 4 times, 3.9 times to be exact, when they have one score. And Texas is also number 1 in opponent passing yards per game. They're number 1 in opponent average team passer rating. They're number 1 in opponent yards per pass attempt and opponent yards per completion. That's a lot of statistics where they're number 1. But I will also give credit where it's due to people who criticize Texas in saying that they haven't played anyone who has a passing offense that's above, I'd say, bad or gutter trash. They haven't. This is going to be the best passing attack by a mile that Texas has faced all season long. It is. Georgia defensively has 11 sacks, 3 interceptions, 13 passes defended, 3 forced fumbles. 11 sacks through 6 games is pretty concerning. That's under 2 sacks per game on an average basis. And Texas, meanwhile, defensively, the Longhorns have 19 sacks, 7 interceptions, 18 passes defended, and 4 forced fumbles. When you look at explosiveness and speed on this defense, I would say Texas is better in those categories. Right now, their sack leader is Anthony Hill Jr., linebacker, with 4.5 sacks, 1 interception, and a forced fumble. Georgia's leader in sacks is Tyrion Ingram Dawkins with 3, and he also has 12 total tackles. These defenses, in part because of their different schedules, but also the fact that Texas, I think, has performed better on that side of the ball, they're different. And I think Texas is overall better defensively. Texas is clearly, I think, better on the defensive line. I think Georgia takes the edge at safety, and honestly, overall, at defensive back. I need to see how Texas does in this game, especially with the secondary they had last year, before I say they're superior to a Georgia secondary that features players like Dalen Everett and also Malachi Stark, Stan Jackson, Julian Humphrey, and Jonel Aguero. Texas's secondary, I think, is good. You look at Jalen Guilbeau, Jahdae Barron, Malik Muhammad, Andrew Makuba, again, Jahdae Barron starting at corner. They've been playing really good football. They have. However, as I mentioned, Georgia by a mile has the best passing offense that Texas is going to be facing all season long. Oklahoma doesn't have a passing offense, neither does Michigan. Mississippi State got destroyed by Toledo, so there's that. But I think it's pretty clear looking at these defenses where Georgia's outside the top 50 in multiple categories. Their defense is clearly worse than Iowa's, for example. Iowa has faced a similar caliber of strength of schedule compared to Georgia because, well, they played Ohio State on the road, Georgia played Alabama on the road, and Iowa did much better defensively with a much more limited roster overall and less talented roster overall than Georgia did, when Georgia's kind of on an equal playing field level talent-wise with Alabama. And for the first half, it looked like anything but an equal matchup, anything. When you look at total defense, again, Georgia is allowing 348.2 opponent yards per game, which is 39th. Texas is only allowing 229.7, which is first. You look at scoring defense, Georgia is allowing opponents to score around 20 points per game, which is 22nd, and they're allowing opponents to score 0.313 points per play, which is 31st. Texas, meanwhile, is allowing their opponents to score less than a tenth of a point per play, 0.097 to be exact, which is first, and they're only allowing 6.3 points per game, which is first. So these defenses are different, and as of right now, especially up front, I would take Texas over Georgia. I would take Baron Sorrell, Alfred Collins, I would take Ethan Burke, Bill Norton, Vernon Broughton, Trey Moore, I would take Colin Simmons. I would take them over Georgia's front. Michael Williams, Nasir Stackhouse, Christian Miller, Jazz Chambliss, Damon Wilson II, Warren Brinson, And at linebacker, Texas has been impressive too. Anthony Hill Jr., David Benda, and other players there. I've been pretty impressed with them at that position overall. So defensively, I'd got to lean with the Longhorns here, but I think Georgia does have some juice on defense that they have been saving. And after that Alabama game, I imagine they've made some adjustments to their benefit. But they had a bad game against Mississippi State, and you cannot ignore that Alabama game when Keelan DeBoer's an offensive savant. And guess who also is? Steve Sarkisian. In the trenches, I would favor Texas over Georgia. I think Texas is the better offensive line. I'd say slightly better. Again, it looks like the best offensive line in the country, but I'm factoring in that Texas has been able to easily overwhelm their opponents and coast on offense at times. So how do they do against a team that maybe can match them pound for pound in scoring? But even factoring that in the O-line and D-line, I think Texas is better on both sides of the trenches. So no more comments there. I think they're better there. Georgia, I believe, has the better special teams unit. Both teams have a really good kicker, and Georgia's rated higher in ESPN's special teams efficiency for special teams. So I believe that special teams here benefits Georgia slightly. Trenches benefit Texas here, and I believe the Longhorns are better on offense and defense from what I can tell right now. As for coaching, this is what favors Georgia. Georgia has the better head coach, and I believe they have the better defensive staff. Texas has the better offensive staff, and as for strength and conditioning, I think that both of these teams have some of the best strength and conditioning programs in all of college football. So this is going to be a very physical fight, not just a battle of athletes, a battle of speed, a battle of big plays, but also a battle of the margins, of the inches, and one of strength and power. I think that Texas is going to win this game, ultimately. I think that they will cover the spread. I'm picking them to win 31-21 in a game where I think Georgia shows up in a bigger way than what the power ratings plus home field advantage would say. As I mentioned, take in power ratings to account, add anywhere from 3 to 7 points home field advantage for Texas, and Texas is picked to win by double digits per FPI, no matter how many points you give for home field advantage, and they're picked anywhere from a touchdown to around 12 or 13 points per S&P plus. I think this will be a back and forth game. I think it'll be close for 3 quarters. I think that Texas is just going to be able to hit one of those plays in the late third, early fourth quarter to put them ahead. And with home field advantage, I think that Georgia will suffer more penalties. I think that Texas will be more amped up. Texas, as Kirby Smart actually said in his press conference, looks more like how Georgia looked in recent memory than how Georgia does right now. And that plus home field advantage, I think, will give Texas the win here by a score of 31-21. I know that Kirby Smart is the better head coach. I know there's an angle where Georgia can win. I do think they can win. It wouldn't exactly surprise me all that much if they do, but I'm not going to lie, it would surprise me a little bit if they win because of how they have looked in comparison to how Texas has looked. I know the strength of schedules are different, but we're 6 games in. To a certain degree, these teams are who they are. Texas has been dominant even with all the injuries that they've sustained in the preseason and regular season to key players. Georgia, meanwhile, has kind of slawed around, kind of been there, honestly, given the talent that they have. So I'm picking Texas to win. I'm picking them to cover. This will be an exciting game to watch and also an exciting game to talk about. I am going to be reacting to this game because of the implications that are going to be, faced in this matchup. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Conolulu OH for being Heisman members and sponsoring this video and channel. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, Tyler Nye, and Chilton Kush for being All-American members and sponsoring this video and channel. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Make sure to check out my Patreon page, merchandise store, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. And as always, have a great day. Go Longhorns and go Bulldogs. Bye-bye.